Welcome everybody, and thanks for attending tonight. This is another one of our monthly public events from the Psychedelic Experience Clinic. Just so you're all aware, we are being recorded. So yeah, preferable if you remain muted until after the presentation, where we'll have time for discussion and questions. I'm very happy and proud to say that we're joined tonight by Pat Song, PhD, for her talk working with erotic feelings in psychedelic-assisted therapy. I met Pat at Breaking Convention a few months ago, and was so glad to hear somebody speak about such an important topic. So yeah, it's really a pleasure to have you here. Thanks for joining us. Pat Song, PhD, is a psychologist practicing in Vermont. She conducts qualitative research on experiences of erotic transference and countertransference in psychedelic-assisted therapy. Her professional experience ranges from AIDS prevention, cocaine addiction research, and clinical training at Harvard Medical School hospitals and a military school counseling center. Most recently, Dr. Song has presented on psychedelic literacy for providers and on working with erotic feelings in psychedelic-assisted therapy. She is a graduate of the Psychedelic-Assisted Therapy programs at the California Institute of Integral Studies, Fluence, and Prati. So thank you, Pat. I'll let you take it away from here.
Okay, thanks, Timmy. Thanks for inviting me, and thanks to all of you for attending and your interest in this topic, which I think is important. So I've been doing interviews with psychedelic practitioners and participants about their experiences of erotic transference and countertransference in psychedelic contexts, and those interviews have been remarkable, and many thanks to the courageous and the generous sharing of the people who volunteered. There have been many consistent themes in these interviews. One is that psychedelics are very powerful amplifiers of erotic feelings, energy, material when it's present. If the therapists aren't grounded in perhaps working with transference and countertransference, it can be very disorienting and surprising. So I'll share some case material with you. And I'm going to try to share my slides, and I hope that works. Okay, it looks like it's working. Let me see if I can, oh dear, but it's not playing. I'm here, sorry. Oh, there we go. Okay, so this is a difficult topic still in our modern day. And this letter was published in the New York Times in April just of this year. And it was from a combat veteran who had started therapy for the first time. And he really liked his female therapist, and he finally felt like I can be open. She told him, you can share anything you want here, that it's safe, because, and he said that's very important for combat veterans because they've experienced a lot that's traumatic or that fills them with shame or guilt or terror. And so he had a dream about her. It was a sexual dream. And he also said he had no attraction to her, but he thought the dream might be important. So he shared, and she really berated him for sharing this. She was very upset and said, this is not appropriate to share. And he felt so terrible that after therapy, he wrote her an apology and said, I will never share anything like this again. And I'm so sorry. And her receptionist then contacted him and terminated the therapy. And so he wrote to this therapist who runs this column, and the therapist did a good job in explaining, oh, that was not okay. And there's these things called transference and countertransference. And she really encouraged him to find a new therapist, but that he wasn't in the wrong. He didn't do anything wrong. But it's an illustration of why this is a difficult topic, right? It's anything that has to do with sex, eroticism is charged for everyone. And then there's a lot of denial about sexual boundary violations. So if you just look at the history of psychoanalysis, there have been numerous ones from the beginning, Carl Jung, for instance. But and then this happened in I think all institutions where there's a power imbalance, like education, religion, psychiatry, therapy, sports, right? So, but it's a difficult thing to talk about because there's a lot of silence and denial about it. And so then it seems like it's a rare occurrence, that it only happens to bad therapists. There's, I think, even kind of a fear of contagion about it. Um, so it's a challenging topic. And I'll share with you that my first clinical job working with cocaine addicts, I was sitting with a patient and I just had this moment of, we weren't a therapist and patient. We were just a heterosexual man and woman looking at each other, finding each other attractive. And it was very alarming to me. And I shook myself out of that and said, oh, let's do this symptom checklist. And I told my supervisor later, and she was just very alarmed. And I felt like I had done something wrong. And I had to reassure her, I'm not going to have sex with him. I have very good boundaries. But, then a similar experience happened with another supervisor. It was like 20 years later. He was very senior. It was about a dream, about a patient, where I'd said to the patient, we're not going to have sex. And he just looked like, oh no. And then I had to reassure him, I have good boundaries. I'm not going to do anything. But we never spoke about these things. And years later, I had an analyst, senior analyst supervisor, and I'm talking to him about a patient. This is just a therapy patient, lifelong history of depression. And his name's Mel. And so Mel listened to the case and he made very wonderful comments and insights, and then he added, this is going to be a little complicated too, this treatment, because of the erotic countertransference. And I was like shocked and surprised and so embarrassed because I hadn't mentioned a thing about the man's physical appearance. I hadn't mentioned, I was kind of in denial that I found him attractive. And Mel didn't, he said, this is really important clinical information. You've got to explore this, be curious about it, be open to everything, dreams, associations, physical experiences, you know. And it was such a relief, this invitation, this permission, because then what I realized was, oh, this is a very maternal, young erotic countertransference. And he was just kind of adorable. And that's the name of this case, actually. And I'm going to return to him. But I just give that example of, it's hard to find sometimes supportive, open supervisors or peers who will be like Mel and say, "Oh my gosh, this is full of important clinical information that's about non-sexual needs and feelings and experiences." Um, so what I wanted to do is to share a case of what I think is kind of an exemplary psychodynamic and psychedelic therapy. And because she's using the framework, and you probably are all familiar with psychodynamic concepts and the framework of how do we work with transference and countertransference. So this might be old hat to you guys, but the case is wonderful. So N is the initial I gave to this therapist. She's an analyst, and she was doing twice a week therapy with a heterosexual man who came to therapy because of his bad feelings about his sexuality and sex. And he also had very rigid, obsessive, stuck patterns of behaving and feeling and relating. And so they did this intensive therapy for 2 years, and he developed an erotic transference. And she, like Mel, gave him permission. First, she, reassured him of the therapeutic frame, of the boundaries, that they're not going to have any kind of relationship outside of therapy. They're not going to have sex there, but that these feelings are very important for his therapy, and they're full of important clinical information. And so it was safe to share anything and everything. And what they discovered together was that initially it was a very young maternal erotic transference. He had powerful longings for her to be motherly. And then, and so the end provided containment and boundaries and reassurance. And they, after 2 years, they decided to do PAP together. And so he did psycholytic doses with lozenges because I guess he was very sensitive, so it worked very well. And the morning of his fifth tap session, he came in and he was very anxious and he said, I don't know if we should do this because the erotic transference has returned. And I'm really worried that pornographic materials can emerge. And she felt alarmed because she said, oh, is it a she was thinking to herself, is it a mistake to add ketamine to this hot transference? Should I postpone the ketamine until we've had a chance to work through the transference? Am I walking into an enactment? Or can I trust the relationship we've built and proceed? And she decided to proceed. And so at the beginning, he ran with very early longings for her to be motherly. And then he had, he talked about his sexual urges and wishes, and they are very vivid. He described a deep wish to be inside her, all the way inside her, a deep cosmic fucking. And he had a fantasy of expansive, sweaty animal sex between them that would blow the universe to pieces, a cosmic shattering into cosmic dust. And then they would be reconstituted. And so this was powerful spiritual, mystical experience for the patient because it was a metaphor of breaking loose these bonds that had kept him stuck for most of his life. And it was very freeing of himself, of his creativity, his sexuality. And he understood it was okay to have these feelings. And so he told her, everything has to go through you, the therapist. All my love, my anger, my neediness, my despair is all directed toward you. I know it's bigger than you and this relationship, but I can only feel it in relation to you. Now, that's a beautiful description of working with transference. So I followed up with her a few months later, and she said he had done several more ketamine sessions, and often with a tinge of eros. And what they discovered was that his erotic feelings are a way of opening himself up to all kinds of previously foreclosed experiences, such as aliveness, expansiveness, creativity, desires of all kinds, and risk taking. So he was finding ways to open up his narrow world. He was taking classes, he was becoming closer to loved ones. So, she was using this framework that I'm going to present, just doing, I think, solid psychodynamic therapy. And so we can talk, sorry, okay. So, I'll circle back to that case, but I wanted to just state the thesis. So the framework is based on articles by Nancy Bridges, who is a social worker. She was at Harvard Medical School and their hospitals, and her specialty was erotic feelings in therapy. And so she wrote articles about that and did a lot of training. And sadly, because I trained at one of those hospitals and heard her speak, I felt like the whole institution didn't really elevate her work the way that it should have been. The trainees were all sent to her talks, but the rest of the staff, faculty, they didn't even talk about her work. It was a little strange and noteworthy. The thesis of her article is that, and this framework is that erotic transference and countertransference contain important clinical information about non-sexual needs and fears and feelings and experiences. And I think the same, yeah. And so, I tell people it's not about sex. It's not, and it's not personal. And I think therapists or people who aren't trained get confused because they think it's about sex and they think it's about them, or they think it's about the patient. And that's where the boundaries can start to get too porous. So yeah, this psychodynamic framework can also be used for any intense feeling states. Mhm. So her framework is, and she wrote an article, and I can send it to you, anyone who wants to read it. So my email address will be at the end here, and um, there's a lot of material written by her that I can send to you. But and so this article, she writes for supervisors as well. And so the first step is to expect erotic transference and countertransference, or any intense feelings really, and to then identify them. And it can be hard to identify them if we're embarrassed, or ashamed, or anxious about the feelings. Like my adorable patient, I was really, it was sort of over to the side. And so it was really, Mel kind of picked up on it. I asked him later, I said, "How did you know?" Because I didn't say a thing. And he said, "It's kind of something in the air, the way I was talking." And I realized later, it's just like when you're talking to a friend and they're telling you about someone else, and there's a little sparkle, there's this energy, and you realize, oh, they have a crush on that person. They didn't say anything, but you can just tell. So that was happening. So once you've identified the erotic transference or countertransference, you work on containing and tolerating and mastering these feelings, right? So her model goes from concrete to more complex, because she's talking about uh, working with early career therapists, right? And so the concrete steps are like focusing on the boundary, the therapeutic frame, um, but also to reassure them or ourselves that feelings do not equal behaviors, right? So the feelings are, it's just like when my patients have murderous rage, it's a feeling. They're not going to go murder the person, but they equate feelings with behaviors. It makes them very anxious. So, um, but then, that's where you give permission to yourself or the other to, like, no, lean into this, be curious, unpack it, explore it. So with that adorable patient, I was able to understand, oh, I feel very maternal towards him, actually. And she also encourages you to talk to other people throughout these stages, right? Because finding language for our experiences is very containing. And indeed, when I started talking more to Mel about this patient and my erotic countertransference, it really takes the charge out of it, right? And I'll share with you, someone I interviewed told me about her first therapy when she was a teenager. And her therapist was this attractive man who was kind of youngish. I think she said he was 30. And she developed a huge crush on him, and it became this obsession and secret. And it just grew and grew. And finally he said one day, "I want you to know that I'm aware of this sexual charge, this erotic energy, this flirtation that's going on between us. And I also want you to know nothing's going to happen. You're not going to have a sexual romantic relationship. You're going to be just therapist and client." And she said it took the charge out of this obsession, the secrecy, and that she also felt like, I'm not crazy. This thing's been bouncing around in here. And she also realized, oh, the therapy is a safe place. Um, so I love that example. So once you have identified and then kind of contained or mastered the feelings, this might be with our patients as well. We create formulations, and you guys all know this probably, but that's our um, making hypotheses about what's going on with the patient, right? What's going on with the therapy. It's a creative process. I think it's one of the most fun parts of therapy myself. So she has the three lenses that she uses to create formulations. And the first one is to think about the patient's developmental history and all that you know. What kind of family did they grow up in? Did they have a chaotic, violent family, or, I've had a lot of patients who actually had the opposite, where the parents almost ignored the children, or just had no interest in their inner lives or their minds or feelings. Um, so so I can give you some case examples of developmental, using a developmental lens. So a gentleman I was talking to, he's a licensed therapist and he's a certified psychedelic therapist, and his girlfriend asked him to sit with her while she's psilocybin therapeutically, and they had all the agreements in advance, and he said they had agreed no touching, I mean therapeutic touching, but nothing sexual. And while she was lying on the bed and she was quiet, she had eye shades on, he decided to lie down next to her and just listen to the music. And he said at one point he just felt this welling up of a desire to kiss her and initiate sex. And it was very powerful. And he felt like it came out of nowhere. And he said, "What the heck is going on?" So he sort of shook himself at this. He actually got up and he moved across the room to sit sort of in a chair and to collect himself. And the next day, when she was talking about what had been going on for her internally, she had been working on her childhood history of sexual abuse. And he was really stunned because he said, "Oh my God," he had no idea. And he said, "If I had kissed her, if I had touched her or done anything sexual, I would have hurt her so much because she was so vulnerable." And so I think of that as an example of uh, sexual erotic material kind of being amplified and in the air. The way like our unconsciouses communicate. There's all this nonverbal energy or communication. So that was amplified, and he absorbed it. Um, there was also a gentleman I talked to who he runs retreats, but he also was a participant, and he took his best friend, another man, to this retreat, and they were all doing medicine. I think it was psilocybin and MDMA. And in the retreat, he just decided, he felt like he had this insight that his friend is a sexual predator, and he became very alarmed and upset and worried for everybody's safety. And he got the facilitators involved, and he was very upset. And they did a good job of sort of containing him and reassuring him. And after the journey, he had a memory of being 5 and a sexual predator being around. I think it was a family member, but he also noted that was when he started feeling like he needed to protect people, especially females. And that's been a lifelong um, value of his, to protect women. It's a complicated thing, but that's another example of sort of developmental material coming out in this, what I guess we could call erotic transference to his friend. Um, and so then you move on to psychological defenses. They're intrapsychic. What's going on intrapsychically? Because, transference, especially erotic transference, is often a defense, right, against other more powerful feelings or experiences, rage, fears of vulnerability, grief, right? So when I worked with cocaine addicts, and they're mostly men, mostly older than me, most of them had never been in therapy. A lot of them were in legal trouble or financial trouble, and they were incredibly uncomfortable in therapy. But I kind of wasn't picking up on that. But what they would do is flirt and be seductive and ask me out and comment on my clothes. And I only later realized that they were trying to level the playing field, that they felt so uncomfortable having less power. But they also didn't like being vulnerable. And let me see if I'm just missing anything. Also, and then you think about the relationship, and all these are interrelated, right? So going on in the therapy relationship between the two of you? What are the patterns in their relationships, experiences in relationships and of relationships, and how is that getting expressed or played out in the erotic transference or countertransference? So I'll return to this adorable patient, and even though it's not psychedelic, it was very instructive for me because not only was I feeling the developmental pull, like he had been abandoned by his mother many times, and she would return. And so it was really painful. Uh, he couldn't be angry or disappointed with her or any women, actually. But I I had to be open to his attempts to charm me. He always presented himself as adorable, sweet, just a wonderful guy, and I wanted to take care of him. I wanted to cure him. Uh, I didn't want to leave him. Uh, but I was also letting him off the hook. He was late all the time. He would forget appointments. He was late with his bill. Uh, I was letting him get away with things that I didn't let other patients get away with. I also didn't talk about that in supervision at the beginning. So I was like, oh, these are kind of red flags for me. But I realized this is how he relates to women and most people, but especially women. So I'll also share with you a case which is with and she's a very experienced psychedelic therapist, medical provider, and she was doing CAP with a man, and it wasn't the first session, but it was sort of the second or third session. And she was just sitting with him quietly, and then she said it felt like it came out of nowhere that she found him very attractive, and she was looking at his body and sort of having erotic fantasies, and then she was very alarmed and said, what is going on? So she got up, she actually moved and sat further away and sort of collected herself. And when he came out of the medicine, one of the first things he said was, I have used relationships with women as antidepressants. So that material was going on for him, but she later realized that there was a developmental piece for her, or a personal piece in her countertransference, which is that he is an artist in the same field that she used to be in. And because of medical problems out of her control, she had to leave that field, and she had a tremendous amount of loss and grief about that. That and at the time, she had been feeling very creatively dissatisfied, sort of feeling this loss. So that's an example of the her erotic countertransference and these different developmental pieces, or and the relational piece, like this guy saying, I use women as antidepressants. So it's kind of remarkable to me. It's one of the things I love about doing psychodynamic work, is how our unconsciouses are in communication with each other. So let me see if I've forgotten anything. So So Nancy also says you just got to talk throughout these stages. You got to get support for this. And that woman, the CAP provider, she actually was working at a clinic where she said, I can't go to my supervisor with this, because she knew that supervisor would be kind of like my other two supervisors, really alarmed and freaked out, and you must have terrible boundaries. And so she went to find she found support from other colleagues, and she also sought out a spiritual advisor, someone she'd been working with doing meditation. And so she uh, did some spiritual practices that really helped her. And yeah, so that was an example of getting support. And she also had wonderful self-awareness, which I'll get to in a little bit. Nancy also talks about knowing red flags. And I'm going to move on to that. Oh, I will return to the red flags. Sorry, these are a little out of order. Um, so I wanted to share with you a case. This is an interview with a very experienced licensed therapist, but also a spiritual and psychedelic practitioner. And she was doing psychedelic therapy with a bisexual man, and he was married to a woman, and he had never told his wife that he was bisexual. And he had never, in her words, never lived into that part of his identity. And so he wanted to do psychedelic therapy to learn more about his sexuality, especially his bisexuality. And so they did psilocybin therapy, and it went well. She said it was fine. And then they decided to do MDMA therapy, and they talked about. And she's very experienced too, but they talked about therapeutic touch. He consented, and so his MDMA session was very sensual, and he was moving his body in this very sensual way that reminded her. She said, "It's like how I like to move my body sensually." And they had he had asked for a handhold, earlier, and what happened was it started to feel erotic on her body, and she started to feel activated and aroused, and she had to stop the touch. And she also said she went to great lengths to not shame him. And so she told me, she said this in the session. Seemed like a lot to tell someone when they're into the medicine, but I'll read it to you. She said, there's nothing wrong with what you're feeling. There's nothing wrong with what you're doing. You have a right to your own eroticism. Feel free to experience what you're experiencing. And it was okay to have therapeutic touch. But there is a charge in the way that you're touching me now that is activating my own erogenous zones. It's feeling more erotic on my body than I'm comfortable with. And so I'm going to have to step back from that. And so she was working alone, which is sort of important to note. And she told me there was something that got opened up in me that I could not close. It was also a part of me as a single person and my unlived sexual life that got opened up and got attached to him. And one of the things I missed was that I was attracted to him. And so they had a few integration sessions, and they named the dynamic that had happened in the medicine session. They both acknowledged that there was this erotic energy between them, something was opened up. And she clarified, we're not going to have any kind of relationship outside of here. This is a therapist, participant relationship. And she apologized to him and said, I've got my own material around this, and I need to work this out before I can work with you again. So I'm going to refer you out. And she said he understood. She also she realized she really missed her attraction. So she developed a preparation protocol for herself. And so before she does medicine work with anyone, she asks herself very clearly, like, if I met this person in a different context, would I want to date them? Do they remind me of anybody that I've known? How do I feel about this person? Was it like to be with them? And that's helpful. So uh, I wanted to share that case because I think it's also really great for discussion. Um, and I'll just launch into the red flags here. Sorry. Um, so the research on, I'm shifting here to therapists who have sex with their patients. This is from Glenn Gabbard, and it's just therapists, not psychedelic therapists. But what we know is generally there are two groups. One are the serial predators, and they tend to be narcissists and sociopaths and very charming and manipulative. And they don't offend just once, they offend multiple times. And they really feel like the rules don't apply to them. They're special. They often idealize their patients too. Well, they're special. And actually, we have real love for each other. It's not transference or countertransference. They have no remorse. for what they did. And so, and they're very difficult to treat because when they're reported and caught, sometimes they're mandated for therapy and they don't do well in therapy. The rest of the uh, offenders, therapists who commit sexual boundary violations, tend to offend one time, and they do feel remorse. They understand they harmed their patient, and they can do well in therapy. Um, and Glenn Gabbard calls them lovesick, and I'll expand on that here in a moment. So the red flags I kind of group under boundaries, self-awareness, and self-care. And so when there's a weak therapeutic frame, when there are self-disclosures to the patient and boundary crossings, and the self-disclosures can be a slippery slope, right? And I feel like psychedelic therapy already has very flexible boundaries, more porous boundaries than psychotherapy. But the, self-disclosure kind of continue, and so that's just a red flag. It's just something to, it's like my frame was weak with my adorable patient because I was letting him off the hook being late so much, or late with the bills, late with payment. Under self-awareness is misrepresenting conduct or unwilling to consider. I mean, you guys can read that. But like with Mel, I didn't mention at the beginning that he was late all the time, that he was, late with paying, and that I was not addressing this as explicitly as I should have or would have with other people, right? Um, and then the under self-care is this is where the love stick fall, right? That there can be we can, this is us really, I think, that we can at times feel needy or vulnerable or want to be taken care of by our patients, or there's a hunger to be loved, or we're using patients to regulate our own regulate us. But the major life stressors are you know experienced by the lovesick. And so really that means um, what Glenn Gabbard discovered was loss, either of relationships through separation, divorce, death, uh, but also physical illnesses in the therapist or a loved one. Burnout was very common. Social isolation. So some people in private practice, they're they work so much that their social life is really work, and loss and grief. And, you know, my takeaway from reading that was, oh, that's all of us, because these things happen to all of us. So we're all vulnerable to boundary crossings or, committing, some boundary violations. So it's kind of humbling. And also, I think it's a way we can have more empathy for the offenders as well, right? And so what are some practices and strategies? And I think you guys probably, these are probably uh, evident and self-explanatory. I do feel like we need to help each other. Um, in bullying prevention, there's this model called bystander prevention. And what the researchers discovered was you can't expect the one kid or a couple kids who are being bullied at school to go get help, to stand up to the bully, to get, adults involved to prevent bullying, right? And what they realized was, oh my gosh, 99% of the people are bystanders, adults and kids, and often were witnesses or aware. So what they did was they educated everybody, all the bystanders, about this is what bullying is. This is why it's bad for everybody, including the bullies. This is how we can all step up to prevent. And I think we might need something like that to prevent boundary violations in psychedelics and in psychotherapy. To just be, watching out for each other, and to, notice if one of our colleagues seems burnt out. or we notice they're going overtime with one particular person, or taking calls in the middle of the night. So yeah. Um, all right. So that's the end of the talk. I do have some discussion questions that where we can talk about tea in the either case, but I think the no, I'll stop sharing here. Um, I think that the T, who had to stop, who missed her attraction to this man and then had to stop the touch, and I think her experience just raises a lot of really good questions or thoughts for discussion. So
Really, thank you so much, Pat. Thank you very, very much. Um, yeah, fascinating as ever. And it's great that you offer both the red flags to notice in ourselves and in others, and ways that we can help ourselves and others through peer support and that kind of thing too. Really appreciate that. Useful for us in the clinic as well, while we're working with, people post psychedelic experience. Um, so in the framework towards the beginning, I was wondering about when Bridges says one should expect and identify the erotic countertransference and transference. Um, do you ever think that this is in the direction of like encouraging it? Sort of like expecting it can perhaps sort of like conjure it into the room in a way if it's over expected. Um,
mm,
uh, I'm also thinking about what you've said about it, the introduction of a psychedelic, obviously amplifying transference and countertransference, and if that's another way of sort of encouraging it. Um, because, there's that one way of thinking about the transference beginning because of the countertransference. The therapist sits there and misrecognizes to begin with something in the patient, which then makes the patient bring all their past history and sort of react in that way rather than the other way around. And so yeah, I was just thinking about expectation and encouragement.
mm. Hmm. Oh, well, that's interesting. I suppose it can happen. You know how, like my teachers always said, countertransference is always a response to the transference, right? But I always thought, well, I don't know. We have our own stuff going on. Like I think sometimes it comes from me too. And maybe it bounces around. So it's interesting about expectation. Um, so I'm not sure. I mean, I kind of, I think it really, I expect transference and countertransference because I think it's inevitable, and it's just really our histories are alive, right? And they're interacting, our unconsciouses are communicating with each other. So I'm not sure how to answer your question, Timmy. I think it's interesting. It would be something to keep an eye on, right? Am I creating possibly an expectation here? Um, I do think it is inevitable that someday we're going to find someone attractive, or someone's going to find us attractive, and now we know how to work with it. So,
Absolutely. And sort of noticed what you said as well about all these instances where things were going wrong or becoming more difficult when people weren't noticing it or weren't necessarily expecting it, and it sort of caught them off guard
mhm.
as well.
Mhm.
Um,
Mhm.
Brooke, do you have a question or something to say?
Uh, I have 14,000 things to say, but I will limit myself. One thing I just want to say is I have a good friend who's an analyst. We've discussed this a lot, and he does encourage an erotic transference. If somebody's shut down and that aliveness isn't free to come out, he actually will stay. And I've asked him, I've grilled him on this. Well, what do you say? You know, he might say, you'd like to touch me, or you'd like to be close to me. But he feels very grounded in the analytic method and in his boundary. So it is an invitation for the person to, you know, it's sexuality, but sexuality is also enlivening, and, you know, it's life energy. So it's not just sex. So it's really complex, and it just takes so much, I think, sensitivity and awareness and training on the part of the practitioner. But I want to just thank you in a general way. Thank you for this work and beautiful presentation, and, you know, much more to reflect on here.
Thanks,
And
Brooke.
also, I think with the touch in psychedelics, because I'm also studying touch, it's really sensitive about, um, you know, somebody knowing their boundaries. So if you feel a charge, feeling the freedom, however you say it to the person, I'm just going to step back and let you be with yourself a little bit. Or, you know, we've talked about this in my training. If somebody wants to get undressed and be naked, you know, I'm going to step out if you'd like to pleasure yourself, or we can put a towel over you, like not inhibiting someone, but also keeping the boundary clear. And I think these are the conversations we just need to be having as practitioners. Okay. Mm.
Yeah, that's really, really interesting, that idea that there are um other ways to let people welcome whatever experience they're having, um, you know, without you know, allowing our own boundaries to be crossed, and those kind of things at the same time. Thank you very much.
Mm.
Um,
Mm.
I
I
wonder.
do think people have asked, you know, when I've done these talks, well, isn't there just plain old attraction or sexual arousal, you know, sexual feelings, and I think you have to be really grounded, like you said, Brooke, in your work and the frame, and then yeah, you can like sort of work with that yourself privately as the practitioner. But you know, so the early people who are just starting to do therapy, you know, and like I kind of felt like one person was sort of asking permission, like I could just have crushes, or that's not a big deal. Like she wanted to run with it, and I was kind of gave a more restrained answer, like use the framework first and get and be really grounded in your clinical skills, and then maybe you work on that in your supervision.
That's it. It seems so important in this work to be able to differentiate oneself as person from oneself as, you know, analyst, or in the transferential position. Um, because that facilitates something, but also protects everyone. You know, it's
Mhm.
very easy to get drawn in by those idealizing ones, but nobody wants to be on the end of the of the other ones, you know.
Yeah, yeah. One thing I forgot to mention, I'm sorry, is implicit relational knowing. That's from like the infant research, which I just love. And it's Beatrice Beebe, Beebe. She does research, oh, Brooke knows her. It's remarkable where she videotapes, usually it's mothers or caregivers and their 4-month-old infants. And they do micro analyses of the eye movements because, you know, babies can't talk, but they're communicating when they look away. So they'll engage with the mom, and then when they look away, they want a break, stimulation. And so, but they analyze these micro movements between mother and infant and how it's full of communication, right? And that the good enough mothers can sense when the baby needs a break, right? And looks away, and then they let the baby look away, right? Or the baby's laughing, and then so so we watched these videos for a psychoanalysis and psychedelics class, and basically the babies are absorbing communication. They're feeling the mother's feelings, and there's a way that they know what's going on with the mother, and the mother knows what's going on with the baby, and it's sort of this nonverbal way of knowing each other. that I think happens in psychedelics. And so it's fascinating research to watch, to see how exquisitely sensitive the babies are. And I saw a video of a 10-minute old baby relating with his dad and kind of mimicking what he did with his tongue. And I think psychedelics induce a profound sort of vulnerable open state like that. Like and so, it's I forgot to mention that because I think that's happening with erotic transference and countertransference, even if nothing is said. So yeah, like the analyst you're talking about, Brooke, just to say, well, maybe you find me attractive too, or would like to date me, or you just kind of offer these possibilities um, to talk about.
Yeah, it's like with the example that you gave of the therapist that laid down next to the patient and then had that, you know, transference, countertransference, parallel processing kind of thing going on. Um, and you know, that they were able to recognize it and so move away, and not let their needs get in the way, rather than that kind of, you know, misrecognition of, oh, the baby's looking away, you know, move in front of its face, you know, just keep trying to give more. Um, yeah, it's really interesting analogy. Has anybody else got a question or a comment? Clodagh?
Yeah, hi there. Thanks so much, Pat. Sorry, I'm not able to share my video at the moment. Um, I'm a certified holotropic breathwork facilitator, and I'm also now on the Graph Legacy training for psychedelic assisted therapy. And in the model that's, I suppose, that I'm learning is that there's always two therapists, and a reason for that is to counteract this, the transference onto one specific facilitator. And it's just like to work in I suppose in a triad, it helps
Mm.
then, like it's safety as well, because and a patient or a client, you know, because they're in an altered state, afterwards they might think something happened whenever something didn't actually happen. So having two therapists, like it's a safety thing, not only for the participant, but also for the facilitator. So I just wanted to ask what your thoughts were on that.
Oh, I agree with you. Thank you for your comment because the the woman who had to break off touch, you could just hear how painfully alone she was. And I think working in teams is good for everybody.
Mm.
And it was really unfortunate that she had to break off the therapy because you sort of felt like, did you abandon that guy? And it's too bad they couldn't have. I think she felt really overwhelmed, and that it was for her safety and his that she had to stop. But if there had been a second facilitator, I think they could have all talked about this, right? Like if there's rupture and repair, or just it's just unfortunate. And I thought it was, you kind of wonder about the guy, right? How he experienced that. And I did hear someone share the way she breaks off touch is in preparation sessions when they're talking about therapeutic touch. She will tell the participant, I also will be taking care of myself. And so sometimes I may break off touch because my hand is tired or I need to move. But but yeah, I couldn't agree with you more about having a team. Thank
Thanks.
you.
So, we've come to the end of today. Um, I really want to thank you so much, Pat. Again, you know, it's such an important topic. I feel like more people need to speak about this, and it needs to be at the heart of psychedelic trainings going forward. Um, I wonder if,
I think so too.
yeah, I wonder if you've got anything you want to say, but before we wrap up.
No, just thank you so much for having me. Thank you all for coming because it's still a charged topic and not everybody wants to hear about it. In fact, there's psychedelic training programs in the US who no interest. I offered to do it for free. And they said, oh, we don't have room for that in our curriculum. I am going to offer a 6-session sort of supervision study group on erotic transference and countertransference through the Open Foundation in the fall. So, check with them. We need 7 people in order to make it run, but I think it would be a lot of fun, actually. So,
Will you send out the link to that?
Yeah, I will. Definitely. So, thank you. It's been really fun.
Thank you so much. I appreciate it. Maybe we'll have you back to speak for us again one day.
Yes, definitely. All right.
Thank you.
Have a great day, everybody. Thanks again for coming. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much.